Okay.
I claim to be this person, not
Thought we'll start with some music, Taylor.
Well, that's not.
I'm into it.
It's
We're gonna dance as well.
I hate
Maybe
to
later.
be
Metaphorically,
for
yeah.
someone.
All right, so welcome to Stillness and Chaos. I've got Taylor Jacobson dialing in from Mexico City, so literally the other side of the world from where I am in Bombay. So I'm Daniel. I'm the founder and CEO of Because You. I truly believe that all of us are wise, creative, joyful human beings, and sometimes a mental health issue, grief, um, emotional distress kind of clouds who we are as human beings. So it's my life's purpose to work on myself first to kind of see who I am as a human being, but also support other people to really see who they are. So Stillness and Chaos is one of the ways I'm doing that. I speak to incredible people like Taylor all over the world, have some interesting, fun, meaningful conversations um, around different themes, just talk about lots of stuff, learn from each other, and really try and understand how mental health and well-being is so interconnected with inner leadership, right? Because when you start on this mental health journey, you have to work on yourself so much. So they're so interconnected that it's a topic I love, and that's what I'm trying to do. So today's topic, we are going to talk a little bit about lots of different things, but we've got something around men's mental health, working on ourselves. Taylor's going to share a little bit about his journey with PTSD and chronic illness recovery, and some ways that we can work on that. Um, and yeah, we'll see kind of where it goes. But Taylor, thank you for being here. I thought I'll just start with a very quick introduction. So you're a serial entrepreneur. Firstly, you've done different types of stints, and some successful, like Focusmate, which you're focusing on right now, and some maybe not so much, which you've acknowledged in the past. But currently, as Focusmate, again, correct me if I'm wrong, but the world's largest virtual co-working community, really focused on helping people to maybe to stop procrastinating, really get stuff done, and mainly through connections, through video calls. I've tried this out myself. It's very cool. So I know you've worked with lots of users, hundreds and thousands of users, over 193 countries, and some incredible work. So congratulations on all the great work that you're doing with Focusmate.
Thanks.
Secondly, you've had your shares of ups and downs, right? Especially over the last 2-3 years. I know you've hit rock bottom in many ways, and you've been very honest with yourself, and you've kind of worked through a lot of stuff. And as someone who's been working on myself for a long time, I kind of see that and recognize, and it resonates a lot with my journey as well. And finally, what I admire really is even though this is a difficult journey that you've been on and you are on, you're kind of you're being public about it in a way, right? The content you're putting out there is really around this, and in many ways, it kind of helps other people be okay with what they're going through, and maybe find ways and pathways to kind of heal themselves. So it's something I really admire about you, Taylor, and I just wanted to say that. So thank you for being here, and welcome to Stillness and Chaos.
Oh, thanks so much, man. Yeah, I'm super excited to be here. It's been really a pleasure to just kind of observe your work from afar, mostly through LinkedIn. And yeah, when you reached out, I just was like, hell yes. And yeah, just really excited to see where this takes us. So thanks a lot for inviting me.
Oh, it's a pleasure. We're LinkedIn buddies as well as other stuff. All right, so I start off with this, right? So clearly you're a layered, complex, interesting person, individual human being, and there's so much that has shaped who you are. So I'd love to kind of know who or what has shaped you.
Yeah, I'll share two things because, like you said, like who knows, everything shapes us. But one important, I think this probably goes without saying, but I'll share two challenges that have shaped me, and I think for the most part, it is our challenges that shape us. One is from an early age, I had a deep wound around belonging. I think almost regardless of the setting or the group that I was in, I always felt like I didn't belong. I was an outsider. I can remember just some really deep feelings of shame, for example, on sports teams where I felt like everybody else had some connection going on, or they, and I was coming in from the outside. Of course, it was all narrative, and certainly these stories come, or these internal narratives came from some earlier childhood, developmental experiences. But the impact that had is I became entrepreneurial probably from a younger age because I felt like I needed to create my own safe spaces in whatever kind of, according to whatever design made me feel safe, basically, right? And if it was my space and I was inviting people into that, then I could kind of pick and choose. I could design the culture. And so probably a lot of my propensity for building communities and my skill at doing that and kind of declaring a vision and creating a culture and inviting people in and helping them feel safe is because for my entire life, I didn't have that experience. And I really, we all crave that, obviously. Of course, I didn't realize that at the time. When I was younger, I just thought I'm an entrepreneur. But yeah, it's become clear to me that came from a deep hurt. And the second thing I'll share, you touched on, starting in 2020, I fell into a really deep pit of first PTSD, and then that led into chronic illness. And yeah, that shaped me a ton insofar as a lot of the ways that I was showing up in the world, let's say like categorically, people pleasing, doing things for the wrong reasons. I just didn't have the capacity to do them anymore. I was too messed up. I was too deep in my health problems and fear states, panic states. I didn't have anything to offer anybody else. And it was very scary for me to gradually kind of walk that back and start just being selfish. But I didn't have a choice insofar as I was just trying to not kill myself. Honestly, that was my main kind of objective, just get through the day and maybe look for a little bit of a clue as to how I could get better. But I barely even had capacity for that. And so that kind of forced me through this transition of learning how to do me, without asking for permission or apologizing for being myself. And I would not wish that experience on anybody, but it certainly, it emboldened me to, be a lot more honest in all aspects of my life.
No, thank you for sharing, and kind of goes back to our main theme, which is vulnerability, right? So people who are with us, Taylor and I will be sharing some of these moments that we've been on, which have been not so easy, and also just to know that we are not mental health experts, and whatever we're sharing is kind of coming from our own experience, and sometimes that are actually, very helpful. What's staying with me is kind of the belonging, and I love how you say I kind of do me, right? And that's kind of not a choice that you have. How does this, like, if you think about the not belonging at the moment, does that show up even now in some ways?
Totally. Yeah. I think I've developed more tools to work with it. Right. I think the most important shift is just recognizing that they're thoughts or their stories that we're making up. And so I still have those narratives come up as, especially in environments where it's easier to fall into comparison. But yeah, what's really shifted for me is I kind of just commit to how do I want to show up in this environment, and I can watch the thoughts. And sometimes, they'll have an impact on the body, right? You start to feel fear. You might go into a state of fight or flight or freeze. And I can track that and also just kind of have the space to look more at the evidence, right? And say, okay, is there any reason to believe that I'm not safe here? Definitely not. Or maybe yes, right? Whatever is true. And then how do I want to show up, right? And actually one of the kind of most enjoyable tricks that I use for myself is if I'm feeling like an outsider, I will commit to the energy of hospitality. How can I, it doesn't matter what space I'm in. I could be at a public park, but how can I act like I'm the host? Anybody I encounter, I'm the host. How can I bring them into a space of, inviting them in to my home or something like that? And that usually just bypasses whatever's going on with me and helps me access parts of myself that I want to experience. And that's not always possible. Like sometimes we always get into too intense of a fear state. We're too triggered to access other parts. And that requires some other remedies that are mostly focused on just getting grounded, right? Getting back to a feeling of safety so that we can be more at choice. And I should say me, but this is kind of my philosophy of how I approach this.
Yeah. So let's go a little bit into that, right? Because you talked about the narratives, you talked about the thoughts, you talked about the body, and sometimes it's kind of it's difficult to separate all of that out. And you've clearly done some work to kind of get to where you are. So I'm just curious if you zoom out and you think about what's your approach to well-being. Obviously, it was shaped by what your personal experiences, but maybe just go a little bit in stages and share a little bit about the philosophical side as well.
Yeah, my approach to well-being has changed a lot. When I was younger, it was much more about having an idealized version of myself that was a certain level of fit, that looked a certain way, that meditated a certain amount. It was sort of like based on imagining that I would feel better and happier if a certain number of boxes were checked, right? And I can remember I must have done this 100 times in my 20s where I made like a workout plan, and generally speaking, that workout plan involved 5 to 7 workouts every week. And, I just never followed through.
You mean physical workouts?
Physical workouts. Yep.
Yeah.
Now, when the PTSD started in 2020, I basically gave up all forms of exercise. And, and obviously well-being is much more than just exercise, but I'm just speaking to some specific examples here. My body was so panicked that exercise was out of the question. My body was responding to an elevated heart rate as danger, and I could feel it. So I just stopped. And that was pretty terrifying just from an ego standpoint of like, okay, now I'm going to get weak and flabby and, I'll be unattractive. And, even as I was going through this experience that made all of these things kind of irrelevant, it was still, there was still some part of me that was very vain and was very focused on that. And so I just kind of committed, like, okay, you're going to go through this process now where you try to heal this part of you that believes you need to look a certain way or perform certain things in order to be lovable, right? Can you access other parts of you that are lovable, or can you find evidence that people still love you, even though you're not working out a lot, or in this case, not at all? And then from that place, kind of from that transition, I started to just look for things that felt good. because my orientation, instead of being, how can I be this idealized person? It was, how can I feel just 1% better? How can I get out of the bottom of the barrel of just feeling like killing myself? And there's no room for bullshit in that game, right? That game is legitimately what's going to help me feel better. And so the place that I started, where really I started to turn things around, was I decided I'm just going to try to take a walk every day. And I'm going to try to use a phone call with a friend as a structure to help me to get outside and do that walk, right? So kind of habit stacking or accountability, whatever. But for me to look at having a call with a friend and taking a walk as my kind of well-being plan was like a total revolution from who I had been before. And I've maintained that approach as I've gotten better. You know, it's really like, what do I want? Not in terms of how do I think I need to be, but what resonates, what feels good. And I certainly integrate science evidence about, there's lots of evidence that exercise is healthy, and, strength training helps with reducing mortality and blah, 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 blah. So I keep those things in mind, and but then I'm still looking for what gets me excited, what's going to help improve my overall sense of well-being or contentment or happiness. And so that's led to a bunch of different things. I've started learning guitar, rock climbing, pickleball. I walk a lot more than I ever have, because I don't relate to walking as some weak man's endeavor. It's like, no, walking is a way that I can really gently take care of my body, and being gentle with myself has become a really high priority.
So a few things that stand out, right? So you talked about the parts and finding other parts of yourself that you kind of love. I think, like for me, this concept of wholeness really is, front and center, right? There are so many parts of me which actually feel broken or feel, not great on different days. And sometimes realizing that, what, I am whole in my brokenness is actually very powerful. And sometimes just showing up that way, that you're not feeling great, but listen, I'm just going to show up. And it's okay to be, in my head, it might be broken, but that's also okay.
Yeah, I want to double down on that, actually, because one of the most important things for me in this healing process has been embracing the parts that, for example, want to lie in bed or watch TV or do nothing. And a younger me would have tried to kind of like discipline away those parts. And there is such a thing as laziness, right? Where it's just like we're making a poor decision. But then what I've learned is, like, for example, if I'm watching TV, it will often give me access to grief. Just following along the narrative of a TV show I'm invested in can crack open a part of me that's really sad and just needs to let that out. And God, it feels so fundamental. It feels like giving myself so much more permission to just, be whoever I am and however I am in general and in the moment. And yeah, like, what a shame it would be to try to like discipline away the time that I spend, watching TV and like letting those feelings come up, or resting, like just the way that I used to judge rest. But as somebody who, in my case, had enough trauma that I often felt unsafe. I was often in a state of not feeling safe. Perhaps we need to give ourselves opportunities like, okay, I'm just going to go lay down this afternoon. Is it the best thing I could be doing? I don't know, but it kind of is just what feels right and necessary right now. So I don't mean to be reductionist about it. Like I said, yes, there is such a thing as being lazy and not following through on my highest intention, but I think just bringing curiosity rather than judgment or fear about some of these other forms of self-care that I
Yeah.
would have previously judged a lot and tried to kind of discipline out of my life.
Yeah. And I mean, yes, and something like that's been super helpful for me because I've had my very severe depression, very low energies, and like times, right? And I think my wife has been incredible because she's been able to hold that line of kind of empathy and high standards, which is a very, very difficult line to hold. Because like the days where I don't want to get out of bed, she's fine a couple of days, but then the third day, if it happens, she's like, all right, like let's come on, just push yourself just around around the building, or do something there, right? So she's like like I feel there's a thin line which if you're not conscious or you don't do it well, you kind of then get into a loop. So that's the first thing that comes to mind. That balance is really important, right? Um, and I think also this is where having someone who really knows you sometimes better than yourself is helpful. The second, what you shared about the grief and what comes up, and that comes out a lot, right? So something might actually trigger off some emotion in you. And one of the things I've been trying out is sometimes trying to investigate where that came from, because usually when there's a big emotion in your body's trying to tell you something. um, I don't know if that resonates, because sometimes it may mean that there's something that is calling for your attention that you're not paying attention to.
With grief, my experience of it is a little different. I would say with anger, 100%.
Yeah, not with grief. Yeah, I'm talking about, yeah.
Anger is a clear message that I'm not listening to something, and I need to investigate what that is and take action on it. Same with anxiety. Usually that's a message. For me, grief feels like more like just letting something go. Like there's something just stuck in my body that just needs to get out.
Say more about the body work, because if I had to think of myself 2 3 years perhaps, and people say, how are you feeling and what are you feeling in your body, I'll be like, I have no idea, because I'm not feeling anything. And now that I've done a little bit of this work, I also know there's probably a symptom of some sort of trauma that I've had, which I can't really feel anything, or I haven't learned the language or whatever, and now I've gotten a little bit better on this. So I'm just curious about your journey with kind of body awareness, working with that, because it's not easy. It's a difficult space as well. I don't know if it's a man thing, but it's difficult.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly not something we're taught or conditioned to pay attention to. I think my conditioned relationship to my body is something more like a tool or a machine, and maybe on some level that's true. We are not our body, but it is our primary mechanism to do everything, experience everything. But I didn't necessarily look at it as a wise source of information. And I think now it's more like my body's like my teammate, my partner. And I think the most important thing is just paying attention to my nervous system state and giving my body as many chances, as many resources as possible to remain in a state of safety, and then tracking when I'm not. And when I'm not in a state of feeling safe, that would be fight or flight or freeze, which are maybe more familiar to people. And then there's also a state of shutdown, which is some people experience as depression. If I'm in one of those states, then I can relate to it in a concrete way. Like, okay, I'm activated. I'm in a fight state right now. And so my main job then becomes getting back to safety.
Can you give examples of that, just with using?
Sure, yeah. So a lot of us experience a fight state with a romantic partner, right? A conflict with a romantic partner. And suddenly, like, everybody is being fool and they're angry and they're trying to win the argument and they're trying to protect their pride, and we say dumb stuff that we later regret. Sometimes often breakups come out of this space, right? So it's that activated state where we become idiots, but we're not actually being idiots. We're just in a primal state of trying to survive because our body believes that we're in danger. So, this is the purpose of the nervous system, is to survive life-threatening situations by one of several different strategies. Okay, so when we're in danger, one strategy would be to run away. That's the flight state. And so we'll experience that perhaps as you're in a fight with your partner and you have the urge to walk out the door, right? Or another strategy for survival is to fight. When you're faced with a threat, you fight against the threat and try to kill the threat. And so we can experience that as an urge towards violence, or it could be yelling, or any number of fight approaches. Freeze is another strategy. Freeze is basically, if I stay still, the predator won't see me. And so sometimes we experience that as the mind goes blank. We don't know what to say. We don't know what to do. We feel confused. Sometimes we want to just get in bed and just be still.
Yeah.
Right. So the point is, we all experience this all of the time. Anytime something feels like a threat, whether it is a threat or whether it's based on some conditioning or trauma. And so just having that framework is super helpful for me, because I know I don't have access to good decision-making when I'm in a state of fear. My job is to just get my body back to a feeling of safety, right? So, we could talk more about all of the things that we can do around that, but that's
let's use one example, right? So which state do you there's usually one of the three that each of us finds ourselves in. Obviously we see kind of, in many times we can go on all three, but is there one that you identify more with? When you're in that state, what's happening in your body? How do you identify that? And maybe one or two tips and techniques that you use yourself.
Sure. Yeah. So let's go with the example of, I'm fighting with my partner. Knowing that I'm not going to do anything productive in that state, right? My goal is to tell my partner, hey, I'm activated right now. I need some space to get regulated. I love you. I'm going to go for a walk.
Yeah.
And when I'm in that state, it's good. It'll be hard for me to access much more than almost saying that from a script, right? But I have the willpower to communicate that, and the willpower to remove myself from the situation so that I don't do anything that I'll regret. And then often for me, taking a walk is a good way to get back to a feeling of safety, because I'm moving my body, which is, when we're in a activated state, the body's it's gonna want to run or fight often, but we don't have to actually literally run or fight. But moving, right, letting the body get out that agitation is really helpful. So for me, it's often going for a walk, and sometimes I'll need to walk fast, or I can also just kind of control my breathing, right? A lot of people are familiar with the idea that you can actually shift your nervous system state through intentional breathing. So I don't necessarily need to go for a fast walk. I could actually go out for a slow walk, or even just sit on a bench outside and get some fresh air and a change of perspective and scenery. And my body is like, okay, there's trees and birds, and this is a safe setting, and I can deliberately slow down my breathing, right? So kind of any of those things are strategies that I frequently use when I find myself in that activated state. And then once I'm there, I can kind of look back at the situation and pick it apart and say, okay, was there something I did that I want to apologize for? And was
Yeah.
there something that she did that I didn't like that I want to address with her? But I really can't do that until I'm in a calm state. And then from there, I can say, okay, what's a loving and effective way to have this conversation, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And I love that. Two-step process, right? It's kind of the working with the body first, feeling safe in your body. Then after you give yourself some distance, then doing it from the intellectual side. And I think usually we try and do it the other way around, which is why we end up in massive fights.
Yeah, I'll add to this. A kind of a more recent growth or breakthrough for me has been we don't need to have this conversation right now. Often the urge, and
Yeah.
right now, the most urgent form of right now is while I'm still activated.
Mm.
But the next kind of layer down of right now is as soon as I feel slightly calm, we need to have this conversation. It's urgent, right? And that is actually still, it's like part of a conditioned fight response.
Mm.
That in a relationship can show up as like, oh, we need to fight to smooth this over as quickly as possible, right? But the more that I teach myself, I'm responsible for feeling safe. I'm responsible for creating my own safety. It becomes less urgent to actually have those conversations because you don't need your partner in order for you to be safe, right? You don't need something to be true or resolved or talked about with your partner for you to feel safe. And so then those steps can actually become a lot more spread
Mm.
out. You still want to hold the intention of, okay, this weekend when we both have time, let's talk about this, right? But it doesn't have to be even the same day or the next day.
Mm. Love it. I mean, we started talking a little bit about the patterns, right, and the conditioning. Actually, let's do this, Taylor, because here we are, two men talking about uh, deep stuff, vulnerable stuff. Now, I'm just curious, right? So you immediately jumped at this and you said, "Yeah, this seems like a topic." Why, men's mental health? Why is this a topic important to you?
You know, on some level, to me, what this just means is if I don't have spaces where I feel safe, where I can explore who I really am, if I don't have a baseline level of well-being and mental health,
Mm.
I'm probably not only am I not, experiencing my own life positively, but I'm not serving others in any meaningful way to them or in a way that is kind of, let's say, aligned with my own purpose. And in my experience, an important element of masculinity, whether that's within a man or a woman,
Yeah.
an important element of masculinity is service and protection. And as let's just focus on men, as we as men become more more secure,
Mm.
more committed to expressing our truth, speaking our truth, doing what feels right to us. My experience is that expresses itself more and more and more, right? First, we establish kind of that safety for ourselves. That's kind of imagine you're building a kingdom. The first part of the kingdom you're building is just for yourself, right? You have your own safety. But once you establish that, I think it's a natural impulse. Let's say it's an evolutionary impulse on some level to include others in that kingdom, right? To extend that safety and protection and service to other people. And so, yeah, what's at stake with men's mental health, I think, is creating a world where there's more men that feel safe enough and feel like their own authentic self-expression has space to be expressed, that they evolve into these stages of their life where they can actually make space to serve and protect more and more and more people.
I love that. That's so eloquent. Um, Protection and service. That feels very close to home. I think I've, especially now. So I'm in a life stage where I'm a dad. My daughter is 5 years old. And I feel me working on myself constantly and, taking care of my own mental health um, is in some way a service to her as well. And, being okay, like she doesn't need to see the perfect me all the time. I think as sometimes as men, you talked about ego in the beginning. I think there's something around the big ego which says, "I've got this." I shouldn't. I don't need to break down. This is who I am. All that stuff. And I think there is a power of also, being vulnerable and kind of saying, I don't actually have this sometimes. And I'm hoping that's what will in some ways be an example, or be a bar, a high bar for her when she grows up around other men as well.
Yeah, well, not to like beat a dead horse here, but to me, what you're talking about is creating safety, right? You are modeling for her that it is safe to bring all of these parts of her forward, not just the joyful, sweet, playful, whatever, but also I'm angry, I'm sad, I whatever. Um, and if you as a man aren't feeling safe yourself, aren't feeling resourced yourself,
Mhm.
you don't have the capacity to offer that to your daughter, right? So it's a really beautiful example of like lots of men do have children when they're maybe not in a position to feel safe and resourced on their own behalf, such that they then have some left over to kind of provide that for a child. But yeah, what's at stake with men's mental health is, for example, being able to be good parents who can in turn provide safety for their children and validate that all the parts of their children belong, right, and so
Mhm.
that those then grow into good, healthy adults who can kind of pass that along.
Mhm. Yeah, and these big topics you're talking, the safety and belonging, especially, right? A lot of that comes down to those narratives that we kind of tell ourselves, and some of the conditioning and patterns that we hold, and sometimes we don't have the awareness around that. So I'm just, if you had to think about this, what patterns of conditioning have you been able to work through? Because that, I feel, is breakthrough, leads to breakthrough. What comes up for you?
Yeah, I mean, categorically, the biggest one for sure is people pleasing. And one of the, it seems like relationships coming up a lot today, but it's something super relatable for everybody. So, one of the biggest ways that manifested itself was um, tolerating tolerating things from a partner that I just didn't want, right? And I think it's important in my view to not moralize somebody else's behavior and say my partner was behaving badly, I was tolerating bad behavior. I don't see it that way. What I see is that in my earlier relationships, I would fall in love with certain parts of a person, certain aspects of them, and to some extent, an idea of who they were that I wanted them to be or who I thought they could be. And then when they showed up in other ways that I didn't like, I would tolerate those, and I would kind of like fight or argue for them to change those things. And to some extent it's healthy to show up in relationships and be able to say, hey, I didn't like that. That didn't that doesn't work for me. Here's what I want in my relationship, and here's some areas where I'm not getting that from you right now. I think that's a healthy, important thing to be able to do because nobody can read our mind, and often people are willing to make adjustments in order for a relationship to work. But that's not what I was doing. I was really resenting people for the ways that they were showing up
Mm.
and suffering about it. And that also, it created this cycle of insecurity, right? Because if you tolerate something that you don't like, you're basically teaching that part that its voice doesn't matter. And so you're teaching a part of you that you don't matter. Um, and so a big part of moving through the PTSD and the chronic illness and was learning to be selfish, was learning to say, I fucking gotta focus on myself here. Like I just need to distance myself from this
Mm.
person, this behavior. There was a period where I basically broke up with my brother because what he was bringing in that moment, there was nothing bad or wrong about it. I just didn't have the capacity to take care of myself and to be in the presence of that behavior. And out of just a sheer desire to survive, it was just like, right. Did I handle that well? Probably not, actually. But it was still a huge breakthrough for me to be less focused on whether I handled it well and more focused on what was true for me and what I needed, what I wanted. And so, those parts are still there, but they're a lot quieter. And I've sort of strengthened these other parts that are much more committed to taking care of myself, being myself, living my truth, whatever you want to call it.
And I know you've also worked a lot on your self-critic, right? So say a little bit more about that.
What comes up is actually, I feel like less than working on my self-critic, it's like I've crowded out my self-critic by committing to cheering for myself, right? There's a moment probably 8 years ago now where I kind of realized that I realized how powerful it was to build momentum using positive self-talk. And I just decided I'm going to crush it at this. And I started to talk to myself in ways that probably previously I would have thought were really silly. But for example, I formed this habit of out loud saying positive things to myself when if I finish a task, I'd just be like, fuck yeah, or like, nice work, T. And for me, saying it out loud, I felt it a lot more in my body. Like literally physically, I was resonating my whole body, and I could I could gesticulate to really feel it. And I would get some kind of, biofeedback from expressing that. And so, yeah, I haven't thought a lot about, self-critique other than just I feel it arising, just stop, just let it go. There's nothing more to do than just interrupt the thought, let it go. And then I also, I have a really committed practice of positive self-talk celebration. It's not frivolous. It's not like, maybe it is frivolous, but it's not thoughtless. But I think for me, a key insight was like, you don't need to do something like miraculous in order to celebrate it. Like celebration is awesome. So like any positive thing, why not celebrate it?
Yeah. And I think especially on those days which are when you talked about the bottom of the barrel and taking those small steps, I feel those are the moments where this, the self-talk, the celebration is actually ridiculously important, right? Because in some ways it's that, I always think of it this way: a difficult phase is like a dark, stormy day, right? It feels like there are lots of dark clouds, but always remembering that those are just dark clouds and they'll move at some point, and you are the blue sky. Is actually very powerful, and it's those tiny steps that actually count, and you got to celebrate it.
Yeah, I don't think it's possible to like overemphasize, what we're talking about here. And there's so many people, my younger self being one of them, who just believe that this kind of criticism is both necessary and like an intrinsic part of who they are. And, it can be a hard cycle to break, because I think we feel like that negative self-talk it's there to help us survive, because it has, right? It has helped us survive in the past, by kind of being vigilant about like, don't fuck up. Like maybe we had a parent who made us feel bad when we fucked up. And so we internalize that negative self-talk to avoid conflicts with our parents, which could have had really high stakes. Right. But yeah, I think just to keep it really simple, it's important if we have that pattern to realize it's not necessary. It's not part of who we are. It is a choice we're making, even if it currently feels very automatic, which was the case for me.
Beautiful. Um, okay, I want to just switch gears a little bit. Right. So you spoke a little bit about your own journey, and just say what PTSD is, so that anyone who's listening can understand it. Um, but
Yeah.
to whatever degree you're comfortable sharing, um, if you have to think about yourself, because maybe many of us have go through lots of traumatic events and don't realize the impact on ourselves till much later when shit hits the fan. So were there stages that you went through where it's a self-awareness and then you started working on it? Um, what's helped?
Yeah. So PTSD is post traumatic stress disorder. Um, and then there's also chronic PTSD or CPTSD, which has a lot of the same, has really all the same symptoms.
Mm,
And I definitely had chronic PTSD actually even before this acute stage that started in 2020. But yeah, in 2020, it was basically from one day to the next, I started having panic attacks. Um, and I was just in a chronic state of dread.
mm,
So yeah, I'd say panic attacks, like constant panic attacks, was the main symptom that I experienced. Um, and yeah, candidly, the first stage was like, I have no idea what's happening to me. Um, and I was not nervous system educated at all at that time. So yeah, unfortunately, the first stage was brutal in that all I knew was that I was having these panic attacks. I was in a constant state of dread. I couldn't sleep. Um, I developed other symptoms as a result of that.
mm,
If your body is in a state of fear over prolonged periods of time, your organs like start to deteriorate. Or well, let me be more specific. Your stomach function is significantly decreased when
yeah.
you're in an activated state, and so that causes a bunch of downstream effects. Um, so that was the first stage. Um, and really, I think the important thing, as like if there is a next stage, was just me uh, learning about the nervous system and adopting that as my lens, where
Mm,
I was in this fantasy for a long time that something would just shift and I would feel better, because that's kind of how it started, and I had never experienced anything like it. So I thought, yeah, maybe this will just go away like a broken bone or something.
mm,
And yeah, the big shift for me was deciding to let go of the fantasy that it was gonna get better quickly, and that I was gonna just do anything that would help me feel even a tiny bit better. And that was kind of demoralizing at first,
yeah.
but it was over a year that I was in that severe initial state, and so at that point it was like, okay, I need to be realistic here and just find something to move forward. And so that's when I took the nervous system lens. And again, from that lens, it's okay, what things can help the body feel better? It's almost like instead of treating myself, I'm just taking care of my body. Right. So
Yeah.
that's when the walks came in. That's when talking to a friend came in, being outside, fresh air, a little bit of movement, connection, safe connection. Um, Started to consider, are there um, forms of play that I could introduce that my body can handle right now? Certainly removing anything that was causing additional stress, right? So like taking things out of my life, from work standpoint in particular, that were adding stress, right? So it's kind of building scaffolding
Mm,
to just create safety. I learned a lot about breathing and the breath, and um, I had been a mouth breather my whole life up until that point. Didn't realize. We don't need to get into that, but just learning. Okay, that is also activating my body. So teaching myself how to breathe through my nose, um, which is again, if you're mouth breathing, you're creating a stress state. If you're nose breathing, you're signaling to your body that it's safe. So yeah, that was kind of phase two, was like gradually introducing elements that could help move my body just towards a feeling of safety.
mm. Beautiful. There's so much. I feel each of these can be like dissect it so much more, but we won't go so much into detail. If there's anyone watching, Taylor and I have no idea if there's anyone out there. Please say something, ask a question, say nice things about Taylor and about me. Anything you want to say. We have got about 5-10 minutes left. Yeah, I mean, a lot of it resonates, Taylor. I feel, so I was diagnosed with having a very high complex mental health issue about 10 years ago, which is bipolar disorder, which, my dad dealt with as well. And the first sign that, something happened was a panic attack. There was a huge 100 people event in Rajasthan. I had no idea what the hell was happening. And, then when I realized it, I sort of, similar to you, that I was like, at some point, I was like, I don't care whatever I have, I just want to live a full life. Right? I think that's when I kind of started doing the reading, started doing the work. And much later on, actually, I realized about the body work, and it's been so transformational. And there are so many ways, right? Because at the end of the day, it's about feeling safe. That's it. You started with the show with that, and if you show your body different ways of feeling safe, I think it's kind of you're halfway there. We're probably 75% there. So yeah, a lot of what you said resonates. Yeah, thank you for doing that. This is quite a moot question, but I'm just going to ask it anyway. What's been challenging?
Well, I'll pick up one thread here. My primary commitment through this healing process has been about authenticity. Or at least that's the link. Truth, being true to myself. And that initially came out of, what we talked about of being in this, having PTSD, having chronic illness, and just really needing to protect myself, focus on myself, prioritize myself. And I've developed this commitment and practice of really deeply listening to what I want, what's true for me, right? Do I really want to have this phone call that this person's inviting me to? How nice it is that they want to talk to me, but do I really want to have this call? And a younger me would have been much, much more likely to just go along with it, right? Rather than even taking the time, like adding that step of asking myself, do I really want to do this? And, part of that is then you realize, no, I don't want to do this. That's challenging, to be honest about that. The next challenge is the new skill of, okay, now how do I navigate this situation? And what are the different ways I've come up with to say no to things, to back out of things? That can be really hard. Often we do make a mess because we don't have skill around that. We can hurt other people. We can have other people that are mad at us because we're not doing what they want us to do. So that's challenging. That entire vector of challenges arises when we actually are clear that we don't want something and we have to communicate it. There's an entirely other vector of challenges that arise from not knowing. So, it can be relatively easier when you check in with yourself and you say, yep, I would love to have this call with, let's do this live stream together. That's a yes, right? Or a clear no. And then you have to kind of communicate the rejection to the other person. But then what do you do when you're somewhere in the middle? And yeah, that's become its own learning pathway for me, where kind of overarching my philosophy is if my answer is I don't know, then don't say yes, but also
Nice.
don't say no. And how do you hang out in the middle? And maybe just get more information or take steps forward that can help reveal whether you want to do the thing or not. But a huge challenge for me has just been like, how do I just stay in the uncertainty of not knowing what to do about this thing? and that can induce a lot of anxiety.
How do you hang out in the messy middle? Yeah, and share. I mean, I think one thing that's been difficult for me, and I'll share this openly, is I've been quite vocal on on LinkedIn, online for some time now, and I think in moments where I've struggled a lot with my own mental health. Part of me is like, shit, I've been doing this. I've been talking to people about this and working on this, and I'm struggling myself. And there's a little bit of a kind of an imposter syndrome that happens at that time. How has it been for you being so vocal about your own journey online in a place where everyone kind of sees it? Is that something that's challenging for you?
That's a great question. For me, part of why I started sharing was because the shame of what I was going through was getting in the way of taking care of myself. Right. And initially, I was coming up with strategies to avoid just telling people, hey, I'm fucked up right now, so I can't do what you want, And, this happens a lot in my work, right? I run a company, we're 10 people, I'm the CEO, people reach out, they want something, they want to call, cold DMs on LinkedIn, whatever. And basically, I just went from saying yes to a lot of those to saying no to all of them. And so I was kind of like searching for strategies to make that easier. And on some level, I just didn't want to admit that I was struggling so much because I had a story that made me weak. There's something wrong with me because I was experiencing something that nobody else seemed to be experiencing. Of course, that's not true. But it was too much work to lie to myself and to other people about what was going on. It was a lot easier to just basically say, hey, I'm in a bad, I'm having some serious health issues right now. And so I got to say no to this. And that made it a lot easier. And so there was something just kind of intuitive for me about some of those early LinkedIn posts, probably in 2021, where it was just, wow, this feels really scary to share, but it's going to feel a lot better on the other side. And it did. And that really ushered in a new phase where I just gave myself permission to, it became a lot easier to take care of myself because there's nothing hidden. There's nothing shameful.
I love that. I love that arc. You talked about, not belonging, not feeling safe, and now you feel so safe in yourself that you're okay being, almost unsafe to the outside. So I love I love the arc of that. Last couple of questions. The other side of it, flip side. What's your ambition for yourself, Taylor, at the moment, at this moment?
It's funny, coming out of these really hard years, there's like so much that I want to do. And so my capacity has gone up. And suddenly I'm like, oh my God, I have a little juice that I can use to like live my fucking life again. So the answer is I have a lot of ambitions. I'm getting into some new sports and climbing and pickleball. I'm learning guitar. I was really kind of an absentee founder for my company for a few years. And it's been really meaningful and important to get back and, get my hands back in the dough and really see where we can go and step on the gas. And yeah, I've also started writing on LinkedIn. So just kind of using a lot of this torture of the last few years and everything that I've learned from that in a way that feels good and meaningful and productive through writing and sharing has also become important.
Yeah, and please keep doing that. It helps many more than you probably think and will know of. Okay, last question. When you see the phrase "stillness in chaos," what does it mean to you? Does it conjure up an image, a thought, a feeling?
Yeah, this probably won't surprise you given our conversation, but maybe one or two things come up here. Yeah, the first is when activated, don't do anything stupid. Sort of we talked about earlier, of like if you're fighting with your partner, right? There's chaos. Your body is in a state of fear. Don't do anything. Be still, right? And be still. There's strategies around that we talked about, but don't take action on any of the impulses that arise as a fear response to the chaos. And then, the other one is we just talked about moments of uncertainty and transition, and really embracing, like I'm in a transition right now. I'm in unclarity, and embracing that transitions have a function, right? Sort of think of it like in the cycle of nature and growth. There's a season for growing, right? That's when you get the tree ring. That's the growth season. But there's also winter, where I don't know what a tree is doing in winter, but it's not growing. But it has an important function, right? And just like we sleep at night, we go through periods of transition and uncertainty and non-action and waiting, percolating, kind of. It's like the pregnancy, the incubation period. So just embracing that has a critical function for us too.
Beautiful. I wish you many moments of stillness in all your chaotic life. You've got a lot going on. But listen, thank you so much. I've enjoyed this conversation on so many levels. We've been personal, there's been philosophical stuff, there's been practical stuff. And I just want to thank you for, living your truth and being yourself, and just showing up as you always are. So thank you so much, Taylor. Really appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having me, Daniel. Really awesome spending an hour with you, and hopefully we can do this again sometime in Mumbai, maybe.
Yeah, for sure. All right, thank you. Anyone who's here, thank you for watching. Thank you for still being here. We've got a couple of other guests coming up in the next few weeks, so please stay tuned for that. Till then, have a super day, super evening. Take care, everyone. Bye.